Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, Finding Yourself Again, where we focus on hope, healing, and recovery from toxic or narcissistic abuse. I give tips on recovery and self-love, as well as healing from the harmful relationships. Today's topic is going to be, what are red flags in dating or toxic relationships? So I'm going to go over the definition for red flags. Basically, it's going to be warning signs that indicate potential problems or unhealthy patterns in a person's behavior or a situation, which normally should be questioned or validated, right? Examples: I have almost 30 of them in total. See, they're all right here. Got them all right here. So I'm gonna go over them one by one. So the first one is going to be love bombing. We all basically, a lot of us know about this one already. It's when you barely meet somebody and they give you a lot of flattery, a lot of attention in the relationship. You feel put on a pedestal. They idolize you. You feel really special and important and things of that nature. It's pretty common in people with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorders. Basically, it's common in toxic people and toxic relationships for them to actually start that. If you watch my other video, I talk about the 3 main stages of a toxic relationship, where that's basically the love bombing phase, the idealization phase, then it's the devaluation phase, and then it's the discard phase. If you guys want to go check that out, you could check it out. I recommend you to. So I'm gonna go over all of these red flags that I have right here. They're not in any like particular order or anything like that. So the first one is love bombing. The second one is going to be controlling behavior. Controlling behavior is going to be attempts to dictate your actions, choices, or relationships. These are people that are going to be like, hey, I don't like you hanging out with this person. I don't like you hanging out with that person. This is really when they normally they'll attempt to isolate you, and you might not look at it that way in the very beginning. I know I didn't look at it like that in the beginning of my relationship. What you'll notice more is that you're spending basically all your time with the toxic person and hardly any time with friends, family, other loved ones that you normally would spend your time with. That's kind of like what this looks like right here. The next one is going to be lack of empathy. So this is going to look anything like dismissing your feelings, showing little interest in your life, or even making insensitive comments. It can be any of those. Lack of empathy, usually these are people that can't see what you're going, they can't feel what you're going through. Maybe let's say you just lost your pet that morning or whatever, and you're telling the toxic person, hey, I just lost my dog or my whatever, and this person they're either unable to, or they're not, or they can, it could be intentional or unintentional, but regardless, it's still harmful, and they can't empathize with you. They can't understand how you feel. They don't really care or want to. Okay, so the next one is going to be inconsistent behavior. This is unpredictable moods, saying one thing, doing another. Also having a history of broken relationships, right? And I think that goes with inconsistent behavior, because if you're inconsistent, you're not going to really have healthy relationships that last. They're not going to be full, healthy, lasting, loving relationships. They're going to be broken because you have inconsistency, and inconsistency doesn't go well with relationships, you know what I mean? Or really anything in life. If you're inconsistent at the gym, what's going to happen? You know, if you're inconsistent at work, probably going to lose your job. You know, so any inconsistencies in life generally isn't a good thing. Okay, so the next one is going to be gaslighting. This is denying your reality, making you question your sanity, or blaming you for their actions, making you feel needy as well. So this is all has to do with gaslighting. Basically, this can be like they do something, you know, let's say, like for example, me. I remember finding out my partner was cheating on me, right? And obviously I'm gonna go into a emotional distress state, you know, probably act a little bit out of character, right? Well, that's exactly what I did. And guess what she did? She gaslighted me, and she blamed me for what the way that I'm acting when she's the one that caused it. You see that? You know, calling me needy. You know, this is normally, you know, normally like you'll catch the toxic person cheating, and then they'll end up calling you needy somehow, you know, with whatever it is that you're, you know, that you're, and maybe you are appearing needy because they're making you feel insecure because of what they're doing. If somebody cheats on you, that's going to make you feel insecure, causing you to feel needy and need their be in constant need of their attention, you know, validation to make sure that they're not cheating on you, right? You know, what's interesting is that these toxic people want this. They need this. This is the source of supply that they're getting from you when you're constantly prying to get their attention and validation. Like, are you sure you still love me? And da 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 da. When obviously, if they loved you, they wouldn't be cheating on you, right? They wouldn't be gaslighting you. They wouldn't be doing any of these toxic red flags, right? So let's go to the next one. I think you guys get the idea right there. I'm trying to just give you a brief rundown. Next one is going to be lack of accountability. Never apologizing, blaming others, and refusing to take responsibility for their own mistakes. That is toxic. You know, I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain why anybody that doesn't have accountability and always trying to blame other people for their actions. Sorry about that, but yeah, it's just it's a toxic trait. You know, you don't really generally want to deal with these people, because imagine you get into a relationship with somebody, right? And you guys get into an argument, or maybe they do something actually wrong. They're never gonna want to apologize for being wrong, and that's not good communication in the relationship. And on top of that, narcissists don't ever think they're wrong. But people with these type of disorders don't ever think that they're wrong normally. They rarely, if ever, apologize. The next one is going to be rushing the relationship. So this is pressuring for commitment too fast, talking about future together very early on, and developing deep feelings very early in the relationship. This is when people are you meet somebody, they're trying to push the relationship. You know, you just met them, but they're trying to already be in a relationship. You don't even really know them that well, which is what happened with me. I remember the person I was with, you know, constantly was asking, you know, what are we? What are we? Within weeks of just talking, you know, and it's like just really trying to push you into a relationship. And mind you, when you meet these people, they're charming, they're flattering, they make you feel special. So you don't tend to think right off the bat like, oh, something's wrong here. Just keep in mind, if it seems too good to be true, if it feels too good to be true, it most likely is. The next one is going to be disrespectful communication. So this is using insults, name calling, put downs. This can also come as joking, slurs, or jabs. Small things that start off as minor that can lead to worse down the line. I didn't really experience the minor part I'd never really experienced like the joking jabs, but I have experienced the insults, name calling, and physical abuse later on in the relationship. So I'm sure most of you have been through that as well. So yeah, basically just um disrespectful communication. And you can also, the way that I would say, like when you're first meeting somebody, in order to tell a lot of these signs, right? Watch the way that they treat other people. Watch the way that they treat people that they've had relationships with for their whole life, or for years already, their friends, people that they communicate daily with. Watch those relationships, because 9 out of 10 you'll be able to get a better grasp on who they really are, you know? The next one is going to be history of abusive behavior. You might not know this when you first meet somebody, because they're not going to flat out jump and tell you that they were abusive to X, Y, and Z, you know what I mean, before you. But it kind of goes along with what I said before. Trust your gut and watch how they have treated. Watch for their relationships. Are they broken? Are they broken relationships? Do they have a lot of problems with relationships in their life? That's what you really want to look out for right here. Excess need for admiration. This is constantly fishing for compliments. This is going to be the people, which is highly narcissistic. These people, they need a lot of admiration. I remember the person that I was talking to, they had ended up cheating on me, was cheating on me with a prisoner. And when I read the messages, it was, the inmate was telling my girlfriend things like, oh, you have such dreamy eyes, and you're beautiful, and all this Disney Channel type of shit, and this is another type of source, or another source of supply that these type of individuals need. It's almost like a need for these types of people, because they feel empty inside. There's like a black hole inside, and they need to feel fulfilled, right? So that's going to be the excess need for admiration. Just watch out for people that always need admiration and to be validated all the time. If you constantly need to validate somebody, constantly need to tell them they look great and they're perfect, and otherwise they're feeling empty and they're depressed, that is normally that is a big red flag. I would say that's a pretty big red flag that you're gonna want to watch out for sure. For sure. Okay, so for the next one, it's going to be withholding affection. Withholding affection. Let's see. Yeah, withholding affection is going to be in order to get you to be feeling needy, desperate, clingy, and this is like when you find yourself initiating contact or chasing their affection. If you ever feel like that, this is normally what's going on. They're probably withholding their affection to you. This is like they're going hot and cold. One day they're showing you affection. The next day they're like being cold and distant to you. You know what I mean? They're like withholding. And what that does is it causes you to go in the state of, it's like a form of intermittent reinforcement. I'll explain that in a second. But it's this whole thing where it's like a gamble, because they've showed you all this flattery, and then they just go cold out of nowhere. Now that causes you to hope and chase for their validation. That's the reason that they withhold affection. So if you find anybody withholding affection, that's definitely a red flag you want to watch out for. The next one is going to be isolation. So this is when, like how I said earlier, attempts to isolate you from your family and friends. And basically, how I said earlier, These people will try to get you away from your family, your friends, your closest loved ones, just so you can focus solely on them, so that they become the source of your everything, happiness, emotional regulation, everything. And they, keep in mind, they also need you to regulate them, to regulate their emotions. So keep that in mind as well. The next one is going to be excessive jealousy or irrational jealousy. This is, let's say you're going and hanging out with a sister or a brother, and your partner gets extremely jealous about you spending time with them. That's toxic, that's a red flag. You should be allowed to spend time with your loved ones, family, friends, people that you have had before the relationship with this person. So that's pretty self-explanatory right there. The next one is going to be over communication. This is too much contact, constantly texting, calling, double calling, triple calling, too many missed calls. Trust your gut instinct on this one. 9 out of 10, something's going to be telling you that something's wrong. Normal people don't really behave this way. Normal people getting to know somebody, or even if you've known them for a while, you're not going to just call repetitively, especially if the person knows that you're busy, and you might be working, whatever have you. They're not just going to be calling you a million times a day, texting you over and over, why aren't you getting back, da 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 da, that type of thing. You're gonna want to watch out for that as well. The next is going to be uncontrollable emotions. Typically this is going to be rage, but it can be others. Excess emotional breaks. So this is somebody who just doesn't know how to regulate their own emotions. Like, they can't sit back and just regulate their own emotions. They need you, or they need an outside source. They need a source of supply in order to validate their emotions. You don't want to be in a relationship with somebody like that, because you're going to be emotionally drained regulating this person the whole time, and you may even forget how to regulate your own emotions. When I got out of my 5-year relationship with my partner, I was so emotionally dysregulated that I needed to get on medication and get into therapy. And I needed to actually learn severe DBT skills to distract me from having, I was having panic attacks where I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was literally dying sometimes, you know what I mean? And I'm scared too, because I can't breathe. I don't know what's going on, and if any of you have been there, put it in the comments, in the description. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has felt these crazy panic attacks from these traumatic relationships with these people. That's why I make this content, because I know how serious it is, and I also know that other people don't really understand the length of damage that these types of people can do to you, right? So let's move on to the next one. It's gonna be cheaters. This is going to be someone cheating with you is subject to cheat on you. Pretty self-explanatory, right? I don't have to go into too much detail explaining that. You really can't trust somebody that's cheating. And the next one is going to be lying and excusing. So people that are lying and excusing, it's a toxic trait. You don't even have to have a personality disorder to do that. There's many liars and excusers that don't even have personality disorders, but you still don't want to be in a relationship with them, because trust it messes up the foundation of a relationship, which is trust. So if you don't have trust in a relationship, then you basically don't have one. So if you can't trust your partner, then you can't love them. And without love, there's no relationship. Without trust, there's no love. So that's how that works. Next one is going to be weaponizing information. So this is going to be using your past information against you. Countless times I've told my past toxic person, X, Y, and Z about me, in vulnerable times of my life, thinking that this person was there for me and cared for me, only to bring it up and throw it in my face later on, and I would say for most of us have been through that sometime in our life, and it's never a good feeling when you go through that. You know what I mean? Nobody ever feels good to have their vulnerable things and times mentioned to them and brought up in their face in a negative or disrespectful way, so if you find yourself around somebody who's doing that to you, I would take that as a red flag. The next one is important. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's a key tactic used in manipulative relationships. It's like a slot machine. You gamble, you win, you're taking a gamble. You win some, you lose some. It's when the toxic person mixes good behavior with bad behavior, loving and caring one moment, and then the next moment they can be cold and distant, causing you to be confused and hoping to get the good memories and good moments again, even though the bad are outweighing the good. What this does is keeps you emotionally invested. Um, it keeps you emotionally invested, not knowing what version of the person that you're gonna get. You can imagine, I know that a lot of people might not understand what intermittent reinforcement means, so I wrote an example right here. Imagine someone who showers you with compliments and gifts, right? Then out of nowhere, they start criticizing you, or they just don't talk to you for a few days. That's going to leave you wondering what you did wrong and hoping that they return back to the loving selves that they portrayed themselves to be, keeping you emotionally invested and in a state of confusion. So that's a very toxic one right there. So you got to really look out for that one right there. The next one is going to be just feeling uneasy, feeling uneasy around the toxic person. It just goes back along the lines of trusting your gut instinct. Something just doesn't feel right when you're around this person. You get this discomfort. Like it could come as anxiety or unpredictability of how the interaction with this person. You feel like you're walking on eggshells. You can never really voice your opinion on something, especially if it's something that they can view as criticism or harmful in any way to them, even though you might really need to communicate something about them that you're uncomfortable with, but you don't even want to because it's going to cause some type of unpredictable argument, right? That's toxic right there. So just trust your gut instinct. How do you feel when you're around this person? Like, that's another thing. I remember there was a lady that I had ended up working with and getting to know really well in my personal life, actually, and she exhibited actually a lot of these characteristics later on. But in the beginning, she was real flattery and nice, and I could do no wrong, and but I would always feel uneasy around her because I would watch how she interacted with other people, but she would treat me a higher level. You see what I'm saying? So I never really took it as that bad until I became on their level. Once I stopped being idealized and started being devalued, that's when I realized, like, oh, this person isn't all what I thought she was. You know what I mean? And she ended up harming me emotionally. I'll probably talk about it here in a second. But be careful, just use your gut instinct on how you feel a lot of these times. That's gonna be your biggest radar. The next one is going to be potential or former partners surrounded around them. So this isn't like a situation where you're talking to somebody and they have like a child, maybe they have like a child or some kids with somebody and they have to communicate with that partner. This isn't that situation. Maybe they're cordial with their partner or whatever. This isn't that. This is somebody who has several orbiters, I like to call. So if they're a girl, they have a lot of different guys around them that they just talk to, right? We all know men and women do not just talk like that, you know. We all know what it is. We're all grown adults. We all know what guys want. We all know what many women want. We all know what it is. So um or if it's a, vice versa, if it's a guy, there's a lot of girls around him. If it's a girl, there's a lot of male orbiters. And 9 times out of 10, these are people that they have dated in the past or had some type of sexual relations with. So you definitely want to take that as a big red flag, and be careful. Be mindful. These people will just tell you, oh, this, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all those 10 people are just my friends. I doubt that all those 5 or 3 or 2 or even one person is just your friend. You know what I mean? There's more to it. But that's normally has to do with relationships. They still have their old relationships surrounding them. The next one is going to be masking. So masking is going to be people hiding who they really are behind a carefully constructed persona, in public, but they're toxic and abusive in private to you, but everybody else thinks that they're this great person, they're nice, they're empathetic even, probably, they think that they're a totally different person. And this helps them out in the end of the relationship when they go on the smear campaign, because then they go and tell everybody that thinks they're great people, oh yeah, my ex was abusive and they did this, that, and the third, projecting, which is another red flag, which is what they're doing. They did all this, that, and the third to you, all the harmful things, and you are actually the one that got away from them, but since they're portraying themselves to be another way, everybody doesn't really see it that way. That's the best way that I can describe masking. The next one is going to be pointing the blame. Pointing the blame. So this is also projection, what I just mentioned. This is when they are accusing you of their own behavior. It's a manipulative form of gaslighting. For example, this is a real common one. People that are cheating on you will call you a cheater. Out of nowhere. You could just be at the grocery store getting some milk, or you could be at school, or you could be at work, or whatever, had a long day, and they're the ones cheating on you, and you could be cheating on them. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. I mean, if they have all these red flags, it would be understandable that you're cheating on them. But I mean, realistically, more than likely, you're not the one cheating on them. And regardless if you are or not, it's about them doing it to you and them calling you out for something that they're actually doing. That's what projection is, or pointing the finger. The next one is going to be prolonged silent treatment. I added prolonged there. I think it's important to address that some people can give you the silent treatment and it may not be deemed toxic. This is short-term silent treatment. Maybe you just had an explosive argument with somebody, so you guys don't talk for a couple hours or maybe a day or something like that. Understandable. Now, when it becomes toxic is when it becomes days, weeks, months, and some people do this shit for years, believe it or not. So there's family members that have done this for years, and that's one of the most toxic things that you can do to somebody, because it is a psychological, it's a psychological, it does psychological damage to you. So I talked about it's prolonged, and this is toxic manipulation. If it's used to gain power, control in a relationship, it's toxic. The intent matters, like I said earlier. If it's used for control, punishment, or manipulation, it's a red flag. And if it's used to avoid communication or conflict resolution, it's a red flag. So if you have a conflict with somebody and they're just giving you the silent treatment because they don't want to address the conflict and come to a resolve and be cool with things, that's toxic. But if you're just getting a couple hours, giving each other time, or maybe a day to just, let each other cool down, not so toxic. There's a difference right there. Okay, and another thing I wanted to mention about that actually is that this can cause significant emotional distress, anxiety, and feelings of isolation. Because it prevents healthy communication and conflict resolution. Studies have actually shown that this can cause significant amounts of psychological abuse. It's not about needing space, it's about weaponized silence. And I think that's very important to mention with that. I had somebody who was giving me the silent treatment. She gave me the silent treatment for up to 3 weeks and still gives me the silent treatment to this day. So if that doesn't tell you that that's a red flag and that's toxic, that's a sign to me. The next one is going to be unrealistic expectations. Typically expecting you to read their mind is a huge maniacally waving red flag. Anybody who will just, let's say they're mad at you, you don't even know what you did, and then you're texting them, calling them, hey, what's going on? Mind you, they're eating this up. And you're like, hey, I don't know what I did, da 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 da. And they're texting you, you know what you did, da 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 da, or just giving you the cold shoulder, silent treatment. It's toxic. I'm not a mind reader. I'm not Professor Xavier. I don't know what you're thinking 100% of the time. That's a toxic trait. The next one is going to be black and white thinking. All or nothing. This is a cognitive distortion where things are seen as completely good or bad. There's no in between and no gray area. An example would be if they make a mistake, they might think that they're just a complete failure. There's no in between. If you disagree with them, they might think that you hate them. So there's a distortion of the way that they perceive things and think about things. It's a really big one. It's a really toxic one that I've dealt with. I remember countless arguments I would have with my partner, and I would say one thing and she would say, oh, so you're saying this? Oh, so you're saying that? If I was saying that, I would have said that, but she's jumping to the extreme. It's always to the extreme. It's never in between. It's a very distorted way of thinking, and it'll drive you crazy trying to desperately explain to these people, explaining through situations. It's just ridiculous, to be honest with you. So this is the last one, and this is going to be incapable of apologizing or rarely does. Most narcissistic and toxic people rarely have a difficult time apologizing because they do not think they're ever wrong. You can be fooled at the beginning stages in getting to know these people because they're flattering you, this, that, and the third. They're trying to, they're giving you the image that they give everybody else in public. It's only when you get intimate with these people and establish a closer relationship with them when you normally start to get abused and start to catch on to these little inconsistencies and these little flags that pop up. A lot of times people can't catch on to these flags. A lot of times people with abandonment issues and childhood trauma and past issues, like we all have a hard time being able to catch on to these things. We just fall in love with the validation and the excessive amounts of attention and stuff that we're getting from these people. So with this one, I would say watch out for their behavior with others, because if you meet somebody and they're a narcissist, they're still a human being. So a narcissist can still step on your toe and say, oh, I'm sorry, or my bad, and that doesn't mean that they're not a narcissist, but I would say watch their behavior with other people on this one. This is where you want to watch their behavior with others. So that's the last one, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I tried to keep it short as possible. It's probably still going to be a little over 30 minutes, but I hope that these red flags help you navigate your relationships so that you can avoid toxic people. I can understand as a survivor of narcissistic abuse if this sounds like I'm being hyper vigilant. I'm not saying to not trust anybody or to not be vulnerable with anybody, but I am saying that all of these red flags are harmful and would be best to avoid at all costs. If this video helped you in any way, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, and comment your thoughts and opinions and your experiences down below. I would love to hear what you guys have been through, and maybe some suggestions that you on some video ideas or whatever that you would like in the comments. I'm really passionate about this with helping people. So yeah, stay tuned for my next video, and remember to take care of yourself, love yourself, because that's the way to find yourself. And thanks for watching. See you next time.